Matt Walsh celebrates Juneteenth. And did he just cancel the 4th of July? Let's talk about it, y'all. Middle America.
What are you people? We're Americans.
The Senate's passed a bill.
We are Americans indeed, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so this is the homie Matt Walsh. Somebody said this to me. By the way, if you don't know who I am, my name is Vin, and this is Middle America. We're not left wing, we're not right wing, we're just right. If you want to be part of the conversation, dear listener, facebook.com/America Middle. It's a free feats environment, so we let it fly. If that's something that's contrary to what you're about, that's okay. But we have discussions there, and you can put out show ideas and all the rest of it. And, you know, once in a while you end up in a debate with myself or whoever. We're supposed to be having a debate pretty soon here. But before that, we've got to recognize, ladies and gentlemen, our newest national holiday. And since it's 12/12, it's actually on the East Coast. It's actually Juneteenth. Happy Juneteenth to all Americans. Now, for those of you who are not in the know, Juneteenth is a celebration of our emancipation from slavery. Long story short, there were a bunch of slaves in Texas who did not know that they were free. And so on June 19th, the big homie stood up and said, hey, you guys are free and all the rest of it. And since then, it's kind of been known in the conscious community as our, Independence Day. So I'm really, I'll be honest with you. I'm not a major fan of Juneteenth. Just for the same reason, I'm not a major fan of 12 Years a Slave or watching George Floyd snuff videos. I don't think it's wise psychologically for black people to continue to ingest all this stuff that is connected to slavery and all the rest of it. There's a whole bunch about black history that I teach my kids that have nothing to do with the transatlantic slave trade and nothing to do with the United States of America. But be that as it may, it's one of these gestures of, okay, we're here, whatever. So here is the very unracist Matt Walsh opining on Juneteenth itself. So here we go. Here's Matt Walsh talking to us about Juneteenth. Let's go. You can see here, guys, the excitement in his face, considering this should be a celebration for all Americans, right? Considering Matt Walsh doesn't see race. These people on the right, these folks like Ben Shapiro, etc., they don't see race. These people, they're not racist. They don't see race. So this should be a celebration for all people that all people should be happy about. So here's Sentinel Justice. He's got an interesting name, Justice. Juneteenth is pointless at this point, and the George Floyd statue can F off. That's Sentinel Justice. Okay. So there's that. So let's watch Matt Walsh talk to us about his feelings on Juneteenth.
The Senate passed a bill yesterday, and this is going to go to the House, so it's not official yet, but they passed a bill unanimously establishing Juneteenth as a national holiday. And I think we have some of the footage of this potentially historic moment. Let's watch some of this. Well, I don't know. Okay. Why exactly am I playing this? I don't know. I don't know why I'm asking you that question. I should have an answer to that. Really, I'll tell you why. Because this is the end of racism. This is the Senate curing racism finally, and I feel like that's historic.
Of course. Now this is a failed attempt. Matt Walsh is trying to be ironic here, but of course his point is very well taken. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't. I was battling myself back and forth because some of this is an intramural discussion. But it is what it is. I'll let it fly. Ladies and gentlemen, this is one of the oldest tactics in the book. Don't do anything real, but offer black people a bunch of symbolic victories, but change nothing that's actually contributed to the miserable condition of African descendants in this country. So this is a situation, brothers and sisters, if you can listen, where your enemy is telling you his playbook. Now, this guy hates you so much, he doesn't even want you to have the metaphorical victory. But he is kind of, his obvious disdain for people like me and you, brothers and sisters, it has, like back in the day, you used to watch a cartoon and the bad guy, the bad guy's got the good guys tied up, and then he goes, "Ha ha! You guys didn't know that the crystal was not in the green bucket, it was in the blue bucket the whole time. Ha ha! Now I'm gonna take over the world." Because he's like, that's what that is. Okay? He's explaining to you that he hates you, but this victory, this little moral victory that you have, really is not going to accomplish anything, because he knows the structures and the mindsets that push white supremacy in America have not been touched one iota by this gesture. We continue.
It's also historic because all of these people who just found out what Juneteenth was like last year, now they just found out last year. Much of the country just found out last year what it is, and now it is a deeply important holiday to them that should be celebrated not only in America but across the planet, and indeed probably across the entire solar system.
See, he's really hurt by this. Now he knows that nothing positive is going to happen for black people because of this, but he's so hurt by even the pretend victory that he can't let it go. So now space aliens are also celebrating Juneteenth. He is right, though. The vast majority of African descended people in this country, I'm almost certain, have no idea what Juneteenth is. He's right about that. And here's Sentinel. And Sentinel Justice is gonna function very well for our purposes in this video. You can see here, I have an idea. Let's make an African-American BLM chocolate bar. That'll show them. Now, some of you are going to say, why don't you delete and block this guy? I never delete and block people that say stuff like this, ever. I never delete or block racist people when they say racist shit. I never do, because I don't think that racism is the unforgivable sin. So I'm sure Mr. Sentinel Justice has other redemptive qualities, and so I'm not going to ban him from my community. As I said, we're a free speech environment. We continue.
Here's what I'll just two quick things about this. First of all, in looking at it objectively in a vacuum, having a holiday to celebrate the abolition of slavery makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. I can see that.
He's overjoyed. He's overjoyed. I mean, again, these are the same people that are constantly telling us we don't see race, we're just one America. So why wouldn't he be overjoyed at the Declaration of Freedom for a demographic in America that wasn't experiencing freedom? He should be overjoyed because there's only one America.
But I have a problem, and and as you know, I've been saying.
Oh, he's got a problem with it. Who would have thought that Matt Walsh would have a problem with Juneteenth? Who could have seen that?
This for years. I am opposed, in principle, to anything that is done to appease or impress a mob. Okay, anything that is done with fraudulent intentions to appease or oppress a mob. And that includes tearing down statues. It includes declaring holidays. It includes anything. If there is something worth doing, you do it because it's worth doing. You don't do it all in a mad rush because you're trying to impress the mob or you're afraid of them or whatever. And that's, of course, what's happening here.
Oh.
It's not a coincidence that we had the riots.
Of course this is what's happening here. We know we don't care about these niggers and their freedom. He's upset. Now, again, I'll show you in a moment that this Juneteenth stuff is just complete performative bullshit nonsense. That is almost insulting. The fact that Biden is the one that's signing this into law is almost the ultimate insult. But you can see here the invective this guy has. He hates these people, you know. But he says, I, on principle, it's not that I'm a racist bastard. It's not that. It's not that I'm a white supremacist. This is on a principle. The principle is, I don't want to give anything to a mob who does things for false intentions. Now, I don't know what false intentions he's talking about, considering all the protesters last year were pretty explicit about what their intentions and ideology were. So I'm not sure exactly what he's talking about there, but we continue.
We have all of this and BLM, and now they're saying, oh, you know what? Let's make Juneteenth a national holiday. It's the same thing I said with the statues. I think a lot of the statues that were torn down were not deserving of that at all, and should have remained based on their own merits.
Oh, those statues. He wasn't even in favor of having the statues being torn down. You know, the statues that were memorializing a whole group of people who betrayed our country and almost destroyed it and sank it into the Atlantic Ocean. Those people, the Confederacy, the folks who tried to secede and break off and commit treason and killed about 300,000 Americans, completely destroyed our economy for generations, those people. And do you know that the vast majority of those monuments were not set up during the period of Reconstruction, where the government gave white people in the South reparations because they owned slaves and now they're no longer going to be having slaves? Do you know when those statues were built? The vast majority of those Confederate monuments were built during the late 50s and early 60s. Now, why would that be, Matt Walsh? Oh, that's right. Because the civil rights movement was happening and black folks were starting to figure out, hey, wait a second, if we come together and work, we got some power here. And the white folks in those given communities wanted to make sure that these niggers understood that they're beneath them. And that's why they stood up those monuments. But listen to Matt Walsh, who partners very closely with Ben Shapiro. I wonder if some of my, because like I said, I have racist friends all over the world. If some of my Nazi friends were to hang up a bust of Adolf Hitler, I wonder how long it would take for Ben Shapiro and Matt Walsh to shoot a show that says, hey, maybe we should take that down. Maybe we should not be celebrating a mass murderer and the arch anti-Semite of all time. Maybe that would be the response. Or would they say, well, we should let this Hitler statue go up on its own merits. After all, killing Jews isn't the only thing that Hitler did. And by the way, he was a man of his time. You can't judge him by these current standards. All the bullshit that I just said to excuse Hitler is literally the stuff that these people say to justify having these monuments of slave raping slave owners and murderers and treasonous bastards who almost destroyed our country. That is the argument that they use to justify it. I told people all the time, I said, people like Matt Walsh want the monuments up for the same reason we want them down. And no, it's not to learn about history. Now, to this point in my life, I don't know about you, but I have not seen any statues of Adolf Hitler or the Reichstag. I haven't seen any monuments to the Reichstag in my where I live, but I know about Hitler. So isn't it weird? Like, you can actually learn history without the necessity of a statue in the middle of a public square. It's almost as if putting statues in public squares are not there to educate about history as much as they're there to prop somebody up as a figure of worship, i.e., the Jordan statue outside of the United Center. That's not there so that you can learn history. That's there so that all the players that walk by it can know this is a standard. This is what you should aspire to. And this is who we are as the Chicago Bulls. We're the team that had the greatest player of all time and had 2 3-peats in a row, which has never been done in sports. That is the point of that sign, of that statue. And Matt Walsh knows that that's the point of the statue. He knows that.
There may have been a few statues that you could make a reasonable argument for taking them down. But even with those statues, I said all along, I oppose tearing them down now.
So even the racist statues, he still opposes taking them down now. Notice how he said that they just rushed into this decision. Rushed into it, Matt. Rushed into it. It is 2021. It is 2021. Okay? The Emancipation Proclamation was read out in 1862. It's 2021, and Matt Walsh is saying this is just way too early. We rush to judgment here. And as Steve McRae says, wrong is wrong. We can judge them by our standards. We don't have to accept cultural relativism. I agree. So there he is, right? There he is. Racism is cured. Okay, we continue.
Under these conditions,
I wouldn't allow the Confederate monuments be torn down under these conditions. What conditions were those, Mr. Walsh? Well, what happened was another unarmed black person was brutally murdered on camera for all to see. And people started taking to the streets and protesting. And then we started having agitators there. And we've got videos, and we've shown the videos a million times where the black folks were telling the white Antifa people, stop breaking shit because they're going to blame us. And the Antifa people wouldn't stop. But that's neither here nor there. So finally, and literally, because the George Floyd video was so ugly that even across the world, it sparked global protests. I mean, it was just so nasty. It sparked, and it was the George Floyd murder was so horrible that even people like Matt Walsh and Ben Shapiro, even Trump himself had to go, "Ugh, that was pretty harsh." Until Candace Owens showed up and gave all the racists the green light to go out and spew all the racist shit because her Uncle Tom Coon self went out and did it, so all the white racists felt like, oh, I could take off my mask now, and whatever. We continue.
all in one mad dash. If it was not for that, if it wasn't for the mass hysteria, and a community just on their own got together and said, hey, we don't really want this statue, let's take it down, fine.
Let me get this straight. Black people are 15% of a given population, right? So these statues were erected in southern states. So you see the heuristic, the game that he's playing here. Hey, if everybody in the community wants it done, fine. But this whole thing where you're going to take to the streets and march and have all this hysteria, no, I'm not cool with that. I mean, by that logic, we'd still have slavery, right? Isn't that true?
But under the circumstances, that's where I think it becomes a problem. Also, I also have another problem.
Oh, you do? What's your problem?
If you, as the Democrats do in the Senate, if you hate America and don't think that America itself is worth celebrating, and in fact, you don't even think anymore that it's worth standing for the national anthem, and you also think, as they would tell us, and have said, that racism today is worse than it's ever been, it's all been downhill, then I don't know if you're necessarily equipped to come up with new national holidays.
Oh, So if you have a problem with the country, injustices in your country, it is not the American way to petition the government for justice. That's not the American way. The American way is to stand up and slavishly pledge fealty to the flag. Oh, wait a second, that's Nazi Germany. We're Americans. The entire premise of America is that the government reports to us, not the other way around. That the government works for us, not the other way around. I saw a meme from one of my libertarian friends that if the founders would have heard of this crazy idea of pledging allegiance to the flag and all the rest of it, they would have tarred and feathered whoever came up with that idea. And that individual did not know how literally right he was, which we will see very shortly.
I mean, I guess that's the deal maybe we should make. It's like, okay, you want to make Juneteenth a national holiday, abolition of slavery, makes sense. So are you saying now that we can celebrate America and we can?
Who is he talking to? Who is this group of people that Matt Walsh is talking to? Because I keep hearing from Matt Walsh and Ben Shapiro that they don't see race. So who is he talking to? We're all one America, Walsh. What are you trying to say, bro?
Is that what you're saying? We can be proud of Americans. Everyone should stand for the anthem. July 4th comes along. We should celebrate that and be.
Jehovah's Witnesses, I'm not one, but Jehovah's Witnesses have never stood for the anthem, and they have never celebrated the 4th of July, Matt Walsh. Does that mean that they're un-American too? Oh no, you're okay with the JWs abstaining from that for religious reasons because you think that that's valid. But if a person says, I'm not going to stand for this flag until all of my people are free, now you have a problem. Really interesting.
Be happy and proud. Putting all the apologies aside, we're moving past that. Is that what you're saying? I think you really got to pick a lane.
Now, look, I think you have to pick a lane, he says.
Hey, you want to?
No, Walsh, I don't need to pick a lane. That's not how America's designed. Mr. Walsh. Colin Kaepernick did not say that he was kneeling because he hated America. That's not what he said. Colin Kaepernick went out of his way to tell. Now, I disagreed with Kaepernick on this, by the way. I completely disagree with Kaepernick on this, but it is what it is. Originally, Cap was sitting down on the bench, and then what happened to him is Nate Boyer, I think, who's a Army Ranger, reached out to him and said, hey, man, I'm fighting for the right for you to be able to protest. That was a peaceful protest, by the way. That was a peaceful protest. Did you notice how he alluded to Colin Kaepernick and then rioters and all that in the same breath as if they're all flat to him? Because they are. Before, recently, these people were complaining that we were being too loud and violent with our protests. It's not that we have a problem with your protests. It's just that it's all this violence, right? How much blood was being spilled when Colin Kaepernick was doing his little peaceful protest? Not a single drop of blood. And Walsh and the rest of them didn't like it either. And instead of accurately representing the man for what he actually said, Matt Walsh and the rest of these lying racists go out of their way to paint the absolute worst version of what the man said as if he didn't speak definitively about what he was doing. Nate Boyer said, hey man, when one of our guys drops in the battlefield, we take a knee for his memory. So why don't you take a knee while the flag is playing? So Cap said, okay, I'll take a knee and simultaneously honor the troops who died, while at the same time saying, we're not there yet for racial equality in America. That was peaceful. And Matt Walsh, you, Ben Shapiro, Tucker Carlson, the entire right-wing establishment refused to listen to him, and you twisted his words. And And then Roger Goodell in the NFL shut this man out so you didn't listen to what Kaepernick said, and then a couple years later you had blood in the streets. That's on you. People can only deal with so much, Mr. Walsh. So because of your lies and your purposeful misrepresentation of people's politics and their position, people ended up dead last year, and a lot of that has to do with you. And the other group that I blame is if the left-wing, whatever CNN and MSNBC are, the Democratic Party establishment, whatever. That's what happened. That's how we got quote-unquote riots last year. Now let's talk about a couple things. First, notice here, he continually uses Tucker Carlson's favorite term, mob. He loves to talk about the mob because it's a great way to completely delegitimize people that have very real and very personal beefs. But did you catch what he said? I'm going to play it to you again because what he said was really, really important to understanding this guy's perspective. Listen very closely.
And this is going to go to the House, so it's not official yet. As you know, I've been saying this for years. I am opposed in principle to anything that is done to appease or impress a mob.
Okay.
Anything
so he's opposed to anything that will appease a mob. Now, I said in my title that this man has now canceled the 4th of July. So I put that in my title, and I said this man has just destroyed the 4th of July. Why did I say that? Well, here's why. Now, Bricktown Media says this guy doesn't know history. Oh, no, Bricktown. He knows history. But you know what he's assuming? He's assuming that his audience won't. And if you've ever talked to, let me not say that. So we're not going to appease mobs. Okay. This is about the Sons of Liberty. This is from history.com, as in the History Channel. The Townshend Act in 1767, which imposed import duties on goods such as china and glass. Adams, that would be Sam Adams, one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence in 1776, which we're about to celebrate in less than 30 days, organized a boycott to keep British goods out of Massachusetts altogether. That's very American. I'm with that. We've got a policy we don't like. Let's organize a boycott. Excellent. That's the American way. They were going up against the English crown here. We continue. According to Adams' biographer, Dennis Fraden, the Sons enforced a boycott by sending boys to smash the windows and smear excrement on the walls of local shops that didn't comply. Wait a second. The Sons of Liberty imposed a boycott against Britain because Britain had the audacity to tax them for the assist that they gave us in the Spanish-American War. The Brits had the audacity to increase taxes, so they sent the tax guy out to collect, and our founding fathers sent him a letter and said, "Meet us by this tree by this time and surrender your job here, to collect tax, and you will be treated most humanely." These guys said, "We are imposing a boycott on Britain." And a bunch of people said, "Yeah, screw those Brits." But you know what else a bunch of people said? They said, "Well, that's good for you guys, but I'm a good capitalist. I want to keep making money." So you know what happened? You know what the Sons of Liberty did? They sent boys. How low do you have to be? Why not send men? Well, if you send men, then you can fight back. But if it's little boys and the store owner attacks the little boys, now it's, this guy attacks some boys, and you know what would happen to him. These guys are smart. You got to give it to them. If that didn't work, so if the smear of poop and the destruction of your property didn't work for you to do that, then the proprietor faced the risk of being kidnapped and tarred and feathered. A painful, humiliating torture that could leave lasting scars. That was the buildup to the Revolutionary War. Violence was not necessarily accepted as a regular feature of politics, but there was an understanding that it might be part of politics as a last resort, explains Benjamin L. Karp, a historian at Brooklyn College and author of the 2010 book Defiance of Patriots, a Boston Tea Party, and the Making of America. Now, were these people complaining about, did they have a bunch of videos of settlers getting choked to death by British soldiers? No. Were there videos of British soldiers choking young boys to death and the boys throwing up and crying and apologizing to his killers as he's being strangled to death, like they did with Elijah McClain? And then the officers from that precinct showed up at his death site and started choking each other on camera, kind of make fun of. Is that what they were? No, they were dealing with taxes. Taxes. They did that mafioso extortion tactic because of taxes. The article goes on to say, we probably would not have had a Revolutionary War were it not for the Sons of Liberty. So, since there have been no BLM kidnappings and tarring and feathering of people, but since the destruction of property last year was such that Matt Walsh would suspend making Juneteenth a federal holiday. Unfortunately for Matt Walsh, what that also means, if he's being logically consistent, is that we also have to cancel the 4th of July, because the 4th of July is a celebration, literally, of armed resistance against the government. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. So he doesn't like, don't comply with the Marxists. I'm surprised he didn't drop the Marxist thing. And now he's continually telling us violence doesn't accomplish anything. Okay. Martin Luther King was trying to get the Fair Housing Act passed. He could never get it passed. Lyndon B. Johnson kept ignoring him, and then eventually the big homie got assassinated. After Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, it sparked what's known as the Holy Week Uprisings. Known as Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination sparked uprisings in cities across America. Known as the Holy Week Uprisings, the collective protests resulted in 43 deaths, thousands of arrests, and millions of dollars of property damage. And, quote, there's a picture right there. You know what's funny? You know what's funny about the Holy Week Uprising? Is Mr. Johnson sent the National Guard and all the rest of it down there to, cull the herd and take care of those folks. And all of his folks were saying, we cannot sign that equal housing bill because it's going to give the niggers the impression that if they rise up like this, they're going to get what they want. But you know what Mr. Johnson did? At the end of the Holy Week Uprising, he signed that document. Now, according to what we just heard from Mr. Walsh wouldn't have signed the document. But you see, what's happening there in that situation is you're trying to get the victim to bear the weight of the perpetrator. The real villains in the 60s were not the folks, not the Holy Week uprisers. The real villains were the evil bastards who would not give people basic human rights and push people to the point where they had to get violent. And you can't say that violence against the government in the face of injustice is not the American way. If you say it's not the American way, then you're going to have to not celebrate the 4th of July. Right? Right. So the Holy Week Uprising was accomplished something. It accomplished the Fair Housing Act, the Equal Housing Act. Now, if Johnson would have done the right thing during the life of Dr. King, then there would have been no Holy Week Uprising. And if the United States criminal justice policies were reformed, then there would have been no blood in the streets in 2020. But people, Mr. Walsh, are sick of it. And the problem, Mr. Walsh, is that when you were coming up, you had Rodney King, but there were only 3 or 4 channels. So all the evil people could dominate the narrative and tell us what actually happened. But now the problem, Mr. Walsh, is that everybody is a journalist now. Everybody has a phone. So when you kill these people who are unarmed and are absolutely posing no threat to you, now people are saying, well, shit, if they can do that to me, they can roll up in Breonna Taylor's house and kill her. I might as well go out blazing. Which, again, is the American way. Right? I tell people all the time, you're never going to see me in one of those videos. You'll never see me in a George Floyd posture. Shout out to George Floyd. Much love to the homie. But you'll never see me in that kind of a situation. Mr. Floyd believed that if he allowed himself to be handcuffed and all the rest of it, that they would let him live. So there's Mr. Walsh. Now here's Mr. Walsh saying, all these people complaining. You're complaining as if racism, this is the whole trope of, come on, what more do you niggers want? That's what they were saying during slavery times. What more do you niggers want? We give you room and board. You get 3 hots a day. What's the problem? Right? Then after emancipation, dudes had no job. They were wandering around in the land. They had nothing. They were supposed to get 40 acres and a mule, but that went to their white slave owners because they had to, repair them. Then it was, what do you niggers want? We set you free. Then it was the 50s and 60s. Couldn't go to the bathroom, couldn't drink a water fountain. What do you niggers want? What more do you want? It's the same idea. So he's like, are these people going to stop hating America? I don't hate America. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty certain that if I put my resume next to Walsh's resume, I'll bet my firstborn. I've done way more for America. Better or worse. And my family has done way more for America, better or worse, than Matt Walsh ever will. I put my life on that. I don't hate America. No, I hate white supremacy. The problem is, in Matt Walsh's mind, there's no dichotomy between whiteness and America. That's obvious. Look, you saw the man's affect, the poor fella. He looked really, really, really upset. Let me show you guys some things, because you might not know this. Here's the 13th Amendment of the United States of America. I think the 92 revision is the most recent one. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. This is one of the reasons I'm not a fan of Juneteenth. And I don't understand how black people could really truly celebrate Juneteenth. This was Juneteenth. This declaration of our freedom was the 13th Amendment. Did you notice what it said, though? I'll read it again. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude except as punishment for crime. So we cannot have any slaves or indentured servants unless they're criminals. Then we can have slaves. So what happened? Well, here's what happened. And now you see why there were no 40 acres and a mule for black people. One reason was we wanted to give that money to white people who had to, start from the bottom because their plantations got destroyed. And the other 13th Amendment, which made it so that now if you lock somebody up in prison, you can make them a slave. And wouldn't you know it, after the 13th Amendment, then we had all these vagrancy laws. And then in the South, you had these slave patrols that then metastasized into the police force so that you had a steady stable of Negro men in prison because after the 13th Amendment was passed, you couldn't enslave anyone except if they were in prison. Mr. Walsh? I cannot tell you how many times I've heard people say, why are you still talking about slavery? That ended in 1862. We continue. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. About slavery. That ended in 18... Somebody's going to write a comment, by the way, about that thingamajig. Goodness gracious. Here we go. According to the ACLU's original analysis, marijuana arrests now account for over half of all drug arrests in the United States. Remember, as long as we can't make anybody a slave unless we arrest them. Of the 8.2 million marijuana arrests between 2001 and 2010, 88% were for simply having marijuana. Not that you're some drug trafficker, just having it. 88% of these arrests were for simply having a plant. So you're stocking these prisons with people for the crime of carrying a plant. 88% of the arrests. This is the land of the free. Nationwide, the arrest data revealed one consistent trend: significant racial bias. You don't say! Despite roughly equal usage rates, blacks are 3.73 times more likely than whites to be arrested for marijuana. Isn't this amazing? One of the reasons that Juneteenth is such a slap in the face, one, is that Joe Biden signs it into law. Joe Biden, you realize this. The war on drugs, Nixon's guy admitted it explicitly. The war on drugs was designed to go after hippies and blacks. The hippies didn't make it out of the 70s, but we did. Then guess what happened in the 80s? Guess what happened? So we started the war on drugs in the late 60s or 70s, right? Then we went to the 80s. What happened in the 80s? All of a sudden, crack cocaine starts appearing magically in black neighborhoods. And then when you get into the 90s, you had the crime bill. So we set it up in the 60s and 70s. We get people hooked on crack in the 80s. And then we criminalize crack and create this new souped up crime bill so that we can start stocking these prisons with slave laborers. And yes, even though we're only 15% of the population, we're about 4 times more likely to be harassed by police for marijuana possession. People's entire lives ruined because they had an ounce of weed on them. So, Mr. Biden, why don't you commute all of those sentences? Because all my white friends are becoming millionaires now selling weed, and you got a bunch of Negroes who are being really good capitalists who are now in prison for the same thing. Why don't you commute all those sentences and let those brothers out and create a work program or a college to small business program and get them set up with a small business loan so they can now start selling weed legally? You see, that is what an actual policy change would actually look like. You see, how about rewriting the 13th Amendment so that we could say across the board, hell no, we're not going to have slaves in America. That's never going to happen. And it doesn't matter. As long as we have Democrats and Republicans in office, that 13th Amendment that talks about slavery is never going to be amended. Do you know why? Barack Hussein Obama didn't touch it. He had 8 years in a supermajority. He wouldn't even think to touch it. Why? Because the American economy, sorry to tell you, come really close, I'll help you. Many of you are libertarian. The American economy cannot survive without slave labor. American capitalism cannot survive without slave labor. And if you say, yes it can, then give me 1 decade where we did not have a slave class propping up our economy. It's never happened. We had Native American slaves. We had transatlantic slavery with the Africans. Then after that, we had the Industrial Revolution. Well, then we had the 13th Amendment, so now our prisoners are slaves. Let's keep it real. Then we had the Industrial Revolution, so we started putting 8-year-old boys in coal mines, and we started putting 6-year-old girls in these horrible factories and then making them work naked next to grown men because their little frilly things would get caught in these processors and the girls would get scalped. So the solution from the capitalists was, well, let's just make them work naked and cut their hair off in a bun, and then, boom, we can generate revenue. There's never been a time in this country, and we're not even going to talk about overseas what we do to people in sweatshops. There's never been a time in American culture where we didn't have a slave labor class. And that's why nobody's touching the 13th. They know how much our economy is contingent on slave labor. They're not going to touch that. They're not going to touch that. See, something like that on the anniversary of Juneteenth, where you strike down the slavery language in the 13th Amendment. That would be something where a person could say, "Holy shit, I'm really proud of my country." But celebrating the day, this is the thing that kills me about black people. You're celebrating the day that the 13th Amendment was drafted. I get it. We got off the plantation. Did you, though? What happened to that first generation of people? The black people, you're just so easily pleased. And then you know what happens? You start looking around and you go, well, shit, nothing has changed. Well, what do you need to change? I don't know. Here. The last one I quoted was from the ACLU. I know exactly how many of you are going, oh, it's the ACLU, they're wrong. This was this came from a .gov. I screenshotted this last year, actually, during the Trump administration. This is a study on demographics and sentencing. Black male offenders continue to receive longer sentences than similarly situated white male offenders. What is the variance, Vincent? Well, let's see. Black male offenders receive sentences on average of 19% longer than similarly situated white male offenders during the post-report period, fiscal years 2012 through 2016. I told you, they do these things in 4-year increments, right? So they had the second term of the Obama administration. This was published while Donald Trump was the president. 19% differentiation in rates of sentencing for similarly situated crimes. That might be the reason, Mr. Walsh, that Colin Kaepernick was kneeling. It might be. Non-government sponsored departures and variances appear to contribute significantly to the difference in sentence length between black male and white male offenders. Black male offenders were 21.2% less likely than white male offenders to receive a non-government sponsored downward departure or variance during the post-report period. That means when the court says, okay, we're gonna let you out early on good behavior or cut your sentence in half or whatever, we're 21% less likely to receive that kind of grace from the government. Furthermore, when black male offenders did receive, now when the government did augment our sentencing, okay, now watch this. When our sentencing was augmented, this is how they augmented it. Furthermore, when black male offenders did receive a non-government sponsored departure or variance, they received sentences 16.8% longer than white male offenders. So when it's a white male offender, it goes down by like 19%. When it's us, it goes up by about 17%. That might be why Colin Kaepernick was kneeling. Has nothing to do with hating America. It's hating institutions and groups of people who are oppressive and can't get over the fact that they no longer are able to own other human beings. Might have something to do with that. This is a guy, these are people who, the minute you say, you know, those Israelis shouldn't be bombing those poor defenseless Palestinian people, these people will tell you that you're an anti-Semite. If you don't genuflect, look what they do to Ilhan. Where's the lie? Ilhan talked about the Jewish lobby and how money affects political decisions, and that has been a staple of progressive politics since the beginning of progressive politics, which is to complain about how money and donors influence special interests because they have money, influence certain political decisions. And so in this particular situation, it was the Israeli lobby, and so she brought up the exact same talking point that every progressive does, but because it was against the Israelis, now she's an anti-Semite, now we need to rebuke her, and of course the feckless, weak sauce people in the squad and whatever, we're not going to stand up for her. They let that girl swing out in the breeze. These people are not your friend. These people are not your friend. So Matt, that might, now I told you guys, I was against Colin Kaepernick. I was not a fan of him augmenting his protests because Nate Boyer said so. I'm sorry. That's not how it works. Can you imagine somebody going up to Malcolm and saying, "Hey, Malcolm, I don't like the way that you're protesting. So I'm a representative of the people you're protesting against. So here's how you can protest palatably." I hope you understand. I hope the next Colin Kaepernick understands. There's no way to protest palatably for these people. And when I say these people, by the way, I'm not talking about white people. I was at a BLM rally a couple years ago here, and the white people outnumbered the black people 10-1. If you go and just type police brutality, George Floyd riots, you'll see that almost 80% of the people getting dragged and beaten up and their skulls cracked and their eyes shut out by police are white people. There's a whole hell of a lot of white people that are not fans of racism. They don't agree with me on everything, and just because you disagree with me on some things doesn't mean you're a racist. But there's a whole hell of a lot of people that are disgusted by this shit and want to see us move forward and actually have some equity here. And no, they don't have a Martin Luther King or a Malcolm X or a Marcus Garvey bust in the shrine in their living room. Hell, they probably don't even know who Marcus Garvey is. They're just decent people that recognize the image of God in their neighbor. And I would dare to say that's there's a good amount of people there. So when I say these people, I'm specifically talking about racist, very, very fearful white people who are afraid of existing in an America where they do not have an unfair advantage and a head start. That's all this is. This is just fear. It's just fear. The same people that were opposing the civil rights movement in the 60s were doing it because they were scared to death. The people that were opposing the freedom of the emancipation of slaves were doing it because they were terrified. I mean, you could read this in their literature. They were scared to death that we were going to turn on them and do to them and get vengeance. God bless her. I had this nice white lady while Obama was running for president, and she said, "I just can't vote for him because I think he's going to do to us what we did to you guys." A little white lady told me that. Oh, look, I forgave. Oh, look, she's 75 years old. She's lived her whole life here. Come on, what do you want from her? But they're scared. A lot of these people are scared to death, terrified. So, look, you just have to understand. They know what's going on. They know what's going on. They feel the grip from this country, and it's like the El Paso shooter, the kid, he's this white guy. And I know he's a monster, whatever, we're supposed to hate him, but I couldn't help but feel sorry for him. And he basically said, "Look, man, I'm doing this because I want to encourage these Mexican people to go back over where they came from," because he said, "I don't want to compete with them. I don't want to have to compete with them. I look at my future, and the future that was guaranteed to my parents is no longer guaranteed to me because I have to now compete with these Mexicans." Literally, go read the kid's manifesto. Everybody was saying, don't read it. Like, you need to read it because it'll give you a clue into the mindset of these people. That's how they think. They're full of fear. They're terrified. They do not want to fight on an even playing field. Okay, so that's why Matt Walsh had that kind of, depressed affect when he was recounting all this stuff. It's fear. It's fear. If a town wants a statue removed, then it should be removed. If an individual wants to preserve it, then they should buy it, auction it, put it up where they want, make the city money in the process. Beach area, that's a very beautiful and elegant kind of solution that does not take into account human nature. As I said earlier, black people are 15% of the population, okay? And all these statues, the majority of these statues were stood up during the Civil Rights Movement, not during Reconstruction, during the Civil Rights Movement by racist white people to put black people in their place. So I'm sorry, that solution that you're talking about isn't going to work any more than a German town in 1950 that has one Jewish family on it voting as to whether or not that swastika can still hang out in the public square. That doesn't work. So in other words, is he a coward? Yes. All these people are cowards. All these racists are terrified of a world where they will have to compete on equal footing. That's it. You heard these people complaining, I'm losing my country, or talking about taking back America. Here's something that's really interesting. Speaking of Mr. Hussein Obama, listen, those stats where I talked to you about the 19% differentiation in longer sentencing, and the fact that that we have a 17% elongated sentence rate compared to white people, that was all during the second term of Obama, not Trump. The Trump numbers haven't come out yet. The Trump numbers should come out later this year. And I can almost guarantee you that the incarceration rates for blacks are going to be much lower under Trump than they were under Obama. I can almost guarantee you. And when I review it, I'm going to play this clip. You heard it first. And as Steve McRae says, who's much smarter than me, by the way, go to YouTube and type Steve McRae. Top 3 as far as thinkers. I'm not saying I agree with everything Steve McRae says. What I'm saying is, if you're a thinker, it's one of the top 3 channels on YouTube, period. And talk to my wife. I spend a lot of time researching thinkers and buying very weird and strange books. And it doesn't matter. McRae is one of the top 3. So I highly recommend you go to that channel, like, share, comment, and subscribe to Stephen McRae's channel, because it will help you to be able to reason rationally. Hopefully, Matt Walsh can go and find Steve McRae's channel, and inshallah, Mr. McRae can give him some knowledge. Say it that way. But yeah, no, that's a true story. And I think this is the first time in the history of the channel that we've actually ever promoted an actual channel on YouTube. Do you have advice for someone who wants to be a help, not a hindrance to true progress? Well, I know this guy personally, but I put it up here because I want people to think about this. So number one, this Bricktown media is already awesome at this. But we'll just use him to as an example. One of the things that we can do is realize our power. So the entire conspiracy theory about Russian interference really came down to them trying to convince us that these troll farms, basically the social media aspect, was a large chunk of the Russia conspiracy. And even though I've been horrible about the Russia conspiracy as far as having any time for it, which I don't, what it does communicate is that these people perceive social media and the influence of social media and the influence of individuals, not famous people, but individuals like me and you. Hold on, guys. All right, that's me being on McRae's channel. So hopefully now it's going to pop. Yeah, so it's obvious to me that the bad guys on the left and the right, black, red, yellow, they know how much power the average, and I'm not talking about famous person like McRae or Matt Walsh. I'm talking about regular people like me and you. They know how much power we have, and that's why they're so crazy. I mean, you've been on the Middle America site where we're flagging this and et cetera, et cetera. The big tech is trying to, I don't believe that they're part of this giant conspiracy, but they're definitely trying to silence certain types of narratives, and they're doing it to individual regular Americans. That means they know the power of social media. So that's why I say we are the media, right? Anytime you see something that's like clear, say something, do a quick post. People might be shocked at this, but like if I'm dead wrong about something, I feel like those are my most powerful moments as an influencer, because how often do you hear people go, I was dead wrong on this? So for example, when I covered the 1/6 riots, I said, holy shit, I miscalculated because you guys just hear me say all the time, I don't care what Trump says, I care about his policies. And basically, after this video, that's front and center. But with Trump, he's a special case because he doesn't have the same lines that other people have, which I should have seen much earlier, even before he was elected. So I shot that video and I said, holy shit, I miscalculated the import of what he was actually saying. And because of that, look what happened. And so that is a very powerful moment when somebody falls on the sword and says, shit, I was wrong here. People are way more likely to listen because what do people like me do all the time? We're just out here pontificating, blah, 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 blah. I have the information. I know the history, blah, blah, blah. Let me educate you. But when you take a posture of saying, I had this perception, I was wrong, or I shot another video that's going to the other channel where I talked about how I was successfully propagandized to support the Iraq war. So I gave this full-throated support of the Iraq war. I was dead wrong about that. I supported the killing of innocent people based on laziness on my part by just ingesting the bullshit line of the government. So it's things like that where that's a very, very powerful tool. Your wrongness is a powerful tool. And so, like, you know, things like that, just communicating and consistently communicating and giving a counter narrative and saying, well, wait a second, what about this and that? All those things are helpful. But that's what I would say is that. You know, just be honest, just talk, and just be the cool ally that you are, and we're gonna be in good shape. And look, you saw Matt Walsh's face throughout the whole thing, right? Like the dude looked like his cat died. He knows what's going on, right? So we're winning. The good guys are winning, right? You know, the whole whatever you want to call it, the arc of history leads toward justice, whatever. You guys, especially you, Bricktown, you know my theological position. I have a very optimistic view of the future. So that's what I'd say. Okay. Having said that, I think it's time for me to go. If you're a praying person, pray for Matt Walsh. He looks like his cat just died. And but on a serious note, though, just pray that the fear that if you're a praying person, the fear that these people have of the next generation in America, they're terrified. You're going to have LGBT people running around safe and stuff, and they're going to be able to work, and they're going to be able to have housing. We're not going to be able to kick them out. You're going to have blacks running around thinking they can do this, and the cops aren't going to be able to choke. They're scared to death of a future like that. So if you're a praying person, pray for these people so that God would lift the spirit of fear. Because I'll tell you what, there is very little difference between the expressions of hatred and fear. They're damn near indistinguishable. So, having said that, love your neighbor, take care of each other. Middle America, we are the media. Till next time, guys.